He's the head of elite football for the NRL. And I've got to say, he's one of the bravest people in rugby
I've
league.
been very impressive the way that he handles himself week
Yep.
in, week out.
He's an amazing referee. He had a dabble at politics as well. And you know what? The lure of rugby league dragged him back in. His name is Graham Annesley. He's been on the show a number of times and he joins us on Sportsday. How are you, Graham?
I'm good, thanks, guys. How are you?
Going really well. I mean, I suppose we're not as busy as you because are you ready to put the helmet and the flak jacket on for another chapter of your career?
Yeah, and I've got a personal bodyguard and all of that goes with it. But yeah, we're ready for another year of controversy and discussion and debate about the game, and I'm sure this year will be no different to other years.
Graham, we joke about it, you know, the challenges that come in your position, but without the passion that filters through the game of rugby league, it wouldn't be that hard, would it? And that's what makes it so great. I guess it's the passion, the amount that people care about their club, and you know, I mean, that's what drags the emotion out. And if we didn't have that, you probably wouldn't have a role. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, isn't it?
100% correct, and I often say to people, when even internally when we talk to our own staff about, we got a rough deal in the media this week, or a club official has bagged us unnecessarily, and I often say to the staff, look, if people weren't passionate about our game, no one would be interested in it. And so you're 100% right. It's the passion that drags that out of people, and sometimes they become a bit emotional and irrational, and I'm sure we're all guilty of that at times.
Hey, Graham, have you ever had have you ever had a club coach or a CEO ring you on a Monday or a Tuesday and say, Graham, well done, your referee's had a great weekend? You're
probably stretching the limits of my memory. I can't say it's never happened, but I'm struggling to remember it.
Okay. Now, of course, leading into this, the trial period and the season as well, there's been some debates and discussions about some of the changes of not to rules, but some interpretations. No. So what has been at the head of the agenda?
Well, it's been mostly about clarification and I guess tidying up some areas of the existing rules. There is one experimental rule that's only going to be used at this point in the pre-season competition. So I'll get onto that no doubt in a moment. But the areas that we really want to tidy up that we think caused a lot of confusion last year and debate was around the play the ball. We saw a real deterioration in the standard of the play the ball last year, almost to the point late in the season where some players looked like they were playing tunnel ball rather than rugby league. They were just literally rolling the ball between their legs or stepping over it. And we understand why that happens, because every fraction of a second that you can play the ball faster gives your team an advantage. But we've got to make sure that that's fair and that the rules, at least there is some sort of resemblance to compliance with the rules. So we're saying to clubs, that went too far. The referees allowed that to go too far. We need to drag that back. So there needs to be a genuine attempt to play the ball. Doesn't mean they're going to be pedantic about it, and if a player misses the ball with his foot by an inch or two, that they're automatically going to pull the play up. But the players need to make a genuine attempt.
Yeah,
so that's the first one in relation to the play the ball.
Yeah, and there was mention of a HIA rule where you could come back and challenge the legality of a player and potentially put someone in the sin bin post the event. Is this something that will play out during the pre-season event?
Yeah, that's the experimental rule that I just referred to in the pre-season. So the way that'll work is that players, if they make a high tackle, they'll be penalised by the referee, as they always have been. So the moment the referee identifies a high tackle, they'll be penalised for that. If it's not a serious high tackle, and what I suppose serious, I mean doesn't warrant being sent off altogether, then the player will stay on the field. But if the player who receives the tackle has to leave the field, undergo a HIA and fails that HIA, or can't come back because it's been identified by the bunker as a Category 1 head injury, in which case the player is not allowed to return, then the player who committed the tackle will then be sent to the sin bin, so that the team that committed the offence will get to suffer an additional penalty in addition to what the referee took on the field.
Right. Yeah, Graham, we were talking about this last night, and I thought, that's a pretty important rule. Why can't we just implement it to this season. But when you talk about those debates and discussions with club coaches and coaches that have raised this, are you seeing that there's a fair few barriers or scenarios that could
A lot of
emerge
moving parts in
with this rule?
Yeah, look, it could throw up some anomalies. I mean, it's well intentioned, obviously, and the real reason that it's been suggested is to try and have a more consistent approach to how these incidents are dealt with by referees on the field. At the moment, there's frustration caused for fans and coaches from time to time about, why was that tackle sent to the bin and this one wasn't, which looks very similar. So it's an attempt to say, okay, well, let's initially deal with all tackles on the field, all high tackles on the field the same way by way of penalty. If it's serious enough for the player to be dismissed completely for the rest of the game, well, that will still happen. But if it's in that borderline area where maybe it's a penalty, maybe it's a sin bin, then let's see whether the player who has been tackled suffers ill effects from that tackle, and if he does, then that's the trigger for an additional penalty to be served by way of a 10-minute sin bin.
Yeah, I like it. I can see some challenges that may pop up, so I like the fact that it's being introduced in the pre-season and just sort of see how that plays out. Graham, has there been discussion at all around what rugby they're doing in the Six Nations, where a player who gets red carded can be replaced after 20 minutes to keep parity on the field, to not, diminish the product on the field for the fans, for the coaches, for the supporters, sponsors? Has this been discussed at all, or is it something that just hasn't been looked at this point?
Well, all of those things, Matt, are monitored. I mean, we know what other sports are doing, and it's not to say that some of the things that other sports are doing don't have merit. But the Commission actually is reluctant to change any rules this year. That's why this one's only being trialled in the pre-season, because the game's in great shape. If you have a look at the interest in the game last year and all of the key indicators around the game, and the game's in such a healthy state that there was a reluctance to make changes to the rules, and understandably. So this is being trialled, but it's everything is always under the microscope, and if we can find a better way to deal with things, and the Commission's happy to make those changes, then they'll always be considered down the track.
Yeah.
So the obstruction interpretation, I'm not going to say a rule change, Graham. This has also been a high point of debate for commentators, journalists, whatever it may be, and you as well. So is it fair to say that now potentially it may fall in favour of the attacking team with officials given these possible new interpretations?
Yeah, I think the attempt here, Sats, is to get a better balance between attack and defence. So I think that the match officials over recent seasons the scales have swung too heavily in favour of the defence, and that has actually in some ways encouraged players not to compete and to instead try and take a lead runner or collide with a lead runner so that they will receive a penalty rather than trying to make their way through to compete in the defence. So there are some key indicators that the match officials, particularly in the bunker where most of these things are decided when it comes to obstruction, they'll look at, and there needs to be a balance between rewarding good deceptive play, which is when you put a lead runner through, it's designed to fool the defence. And if they do that and they comply with certain indicators that they're required to comply with, then that should be rewarded. But we need to make sure, of course, that we don't open the floodgates for a mass amount of lead runners going through and taking out defenders. So it's got to be fair to both attack and defence.
Yeah, I think we've got enough people that can make a really sound judgment on that. Is it fair to say, Graham, that bunker officials have probably wanted to rule in favour at times to the attacking team because there's a good play, but they've had to abide by the interpretations?
Look, I guess that could be the case in some instances, but we think that the guidelines have probably been a bit too strict, and we've loosened them a little, and we haven't done this. We haven't been sitting around nasal gazing in head office making this up ourselves. We've consulted with a number of the game's leading senior coaches, and we've modified the indicators for the bunker officials to make these decisions. And I think the end result, as you said a moment ago, the end result is we'll see less tries disallowed for obstruction, but there will still be tries that will be disallowed where there is a genuine obstruction involved.
Nice.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a lot of support on the back of this interpretation change. It gives, I guess, being black and white, it was very hard for the officials to rule any other way than defender was taken out. And there were so many times, I want to say so many times, but there were a number of times when you say, well, he's not going to get there and he's just taken a dive. So I applaud you, Graham, on making that decision because obviously with the input from key stakeholders, it's important that we give the fans. You don't want to. It's not just a free for all, but you want to give the fans what they want.
Yeah, correct. I mean, the objective of the game is to see good, open, attacking football. And as I said, it's a legitimate tactic in the game to try and fool the defence with players who could get the ball but don't receive the ball. And one of the indicators is that the lead runner has to be in a position to receive the ball. So you can't just send them herring through before the ball's even been played. They need to be in a position to receive the ball, but then, of course, they get cut out. And if they then follow through and run for gaps rather than running directly at players, and they do it on the inside rather than the outside shoulder, then, we don't want to reward defenders who then just deliberately bump into those players in order to try and milk a penalty.
So before we let you go, one that is always on our text line, Graham, when we're talking about rules and players, is players feigning injury during the game, slow down or get the bunker to look at possible contact. Is there not a lot referees can do with that scenario?
With lying down in seeking a penalty?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, we addressed that to a degree, not this year, but we've addressed that last year by making it clear that the bunker could only intervene on foul play for a reportable offence, because what we were seeing a couple of seasons ago was that any kind of minimal contact with the head whatsoever, players were simply refusing to get up and play the ball. And the referee was forced to stop the game, and then the bunker would review it and say, oh, yeah, well, there was some head contact there, so they'd get a penalty. So what we saw last year, and it did have some degree of success, that referees they were still having to stop the game because you don't know whether a player is genuinely injured or not.
No.
So they'd still have to stop the game. The bunker would review the footage and say, there's not much in that at all. There was some contact, but it was only minimal, so it's play the ball. And so they kind of lost the incentive to lie down unnecessarily unless they were genuinely hurt.
Yep.
Can we make a blanket rule that if you do lay down and there was a slight contact, if you're laying down, you're obviously hurt, so you might have to go off for a HIA for 15 minutes?
Yeah, well, look, again, that's an option, Matt. I mean, it's not something that will happen this year, but every year we conduct these sort of reviews, and ultimately they're determined by the Commission. But if we thought that was a growing problem and not being addressed through the existing rules, then all those things can be considered and would be considered. Nothing's off the table, but we don't want to make changes for the sake of change. We need to be making changes that are required, and that's the role of the Commission.
Yeah, I like it.
Well, we like how you front up. We like how articulate you are around it as well, Graham. And before we let you go, when you were a referee, who was the player that was the yappiest?
Do you really want me to answer this question?
Yep, go for it.
Well, look, he's a great bloke and I get on really well with him these days, but I'd have to say one of the most difficult players to manage on the field from a referee's perspective was the King.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I believe that. I would believe it.
Yeah, he always thought he was smarter than the referees, didn't he?
Yes.
Hey, Graham, thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean,
we know you've got a massive season ahead. And,
no problems, guys.
We love that you've come on the show once again.
Thanks, mate.
Anytime at all. Thanks, guys.
For more like that, follow the Sports Day with Sats and Rats socials and listen live on SEN Radio.